Welcome to Women Winning Divorce. I am your host, Heather Quick. I am an attorney, entrepreneur, author, and founder of Florida Women's Law Group, the only divorce firm for women by women. I love thinking big, thinking outside the box, creating creative solutions for women, and empowering women to win in all aspects of their life. Our approach at Florida Women's Law Group is to provide women with a strategy to not only achieve their objectives, but win at life. I believe that what may show up as adversity is simply an opportunity to change and improve your life. In each episode, I sit down with innovative professionals and leaders who are focused on how you can be your best self before, during, and after divorce. In these conversations, we are looking at how women can win at life. I have the unique opportunity to meet women when they are at a transition period of life. But that is only the beginning to becoming your best self and winning at life on your terms. With our guests, we enjoy the opportunity to explore ways all women can win and enhance their life, no matter where they are in their journey. Because divorce is just a point in life, not the end and not what defines you, rather a catalyst for your growth. Are you facing the challenges of divorce and feeling overwhelmed? Introducing Divorce 101, your essential online course designed to empower you through the divorce process. I'm Heather Quick, attorney and CEO at Florida Women's Law Group. Gain confidence and clarity with expert guidance on legalities, financial considerations, and your emotional well-being. We believe in empowering you to navigate this journey with strength and knowledge. Enroll in Divorce 101 today and take control of your future. As a valued podcast listener, you will get $100 off the course. So please see the show notes for the promo code and the link. You can also find out more at floridawomensLawGroup.com or always call us at 904-567-0121. Divorce for women by women. Welcome to this week's episode of Women Winning Divorce. I'm Heather Quick, owner and attorney at Florida Women's Law Group. Today, we have Sam Abukhodeir joining us. Sam is the founder and managing partner of the Florida Probate and Family Law Firm. Sam, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we are excited to have you, and we are going to be discussing international divorce and how there are certainly different situations that may arise in the divorce process when doing it from afar. So I am very excited about that. And as always, love having lawyers in Florida to discuss these different topics that we have. So Sam, would you share with me and our listeners a little bit about how you got into family law?
Absolutely. So I went to FSU for undergrad, did not think I was going to law school, wanted to go to medical school, and then came down to FIU Law, which is where I attended law school. I teach there now. I'm part of the adjunct faculty in the honors college. And while I was in law school, took some classes, did not take family law because I was like, I'm not ended up interning for the administrative probate judge and got a little bit of family law experience while I was doing that for the judge. And then eventually went to a couple firms that were practicing family law, ran their probate departments, learned the family law aspect, and then voila.
Well, that is great. And so your firm, obviously by the name, does probate as well as family law. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you have opened your firm about 5.5 years ago?
Yep, we're about 5.5 years. We have two departments. We have our family department, our probate department. And we are now a team of, 32? 32
Wow.
team. Yeah.
That is awesome. And merged with your husband's firm. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is like the $1 million question that people are like, how would you work with your significant other? And we met in law school. Very, very interesting background where we come from two different cultures. And he has a probate guardianship and estate planning practice. But we had our first son last year. I'm pregnant with our daughter now. And so we just decided that it was easier to join forces. So he obviously has a different crowd of people, different clientele. He's Spanish speaking, I'm Arabic speaking. So he grabs a different type of client, type of avatar client. But by joining forces, it made more sense for us.
Well, and that is amazing. And you know what? We'll have to do another episode on that, I'm sure, working with your spouses, because especially like when you're a family law attorney, right? But because that presents challenges within itself, of course, and a lot of benefits as well, I know. But that is wonderful, and congratulations about your expanding family. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Now, do you have any special focus or specialized training in family law that you focus on?
I would say no, we're not specialized in any certain area of family law, but the majority of our clients are either going through a divorce, a paternity action, a post-judgment action. We've been getting a ton of prenups and post-nups lately, which has not been the norm, but I would say in the past 6 to 12 months, it's becoming the norm. And then what sets us apart is I am Palestinian American and my husband is Cuban Puerto Rican American. And so we are able to get a whole different, demographic of clients. And so we do get cases from people of different cultures, religions, all sorts of things. So I think that's what, if I had to say our specialty was, that's probably it.
And that is, there's so much there to unpack that we can't even in this show, but I've only really had a handful of the cases where it was mostly, which it is cultural and then, religion, but in the divorce, there are a lot of issues that, as you know, the judges aren't going to solve for people, that make it so complex and fascinating, but, very challenging to help the parties come to terms with, especially, it was mostly the different religions. That was a big thing in the cases that I've had, because, at least up here in Northeast Florida, our experience is, and especially like our guidelines, right? Like how the courts address things, is everything based on essentially the Christian holidays. So if you want something different, and a lot of people do and need and want things special, you really ought to be willing to work together to, I think, achieve that. What is your experience with that? If you have a similar situation? I mean, you're much more diverse in South Florida than we are up here, I think, on North Florida.
It's very similar to what you just said.
Is it? Really? Oh my gosh.
So judges do not want to get involved. They usually don't have the right to get involved.
Yes.
Legally. So they try to tell the parties to resolve it. The issues that we're seeing is the people that are hiring are saying, I don't care. I still want to take this to court. I want a decision made. And no matter how many times we try to explain to them, it's really hard. Have we had judges make decisions on religious holidays? We have. I don't know under what authority. But what we usually do and what we push is for during mediation or during some sort of hearing, we step outside or we try to come to an agreement through the attorneys, where the attorneys will say, well, what if you take this holiday and then in exchange you give them this holiday? And we try to negotiate that way. But it's like pulling teeth. They're not willing to usually come to terms until we put a lot of pressure on them. But we have a lot more religions and cultures, I think, in our area. And so like from a Middle Eastern aspect, we have the Christian Middle Eastern community, the Catholic, the Orthodox, and the Muslim communities. And so we have to take that into consideration. And now what we're seeing to be more prevalent is that two religions are married. So then that
Yeah.
complicates things even more,
Mhm.
because you have two sets of holidays, but the beauty of that is the Muslim parent takes the Islamic holidays, and then the Catholic parent takes the Catholic holidays. So
in actuality, that is pretty good, right? Because then we're not just dividing all the same holidays. And I think in that instance, one, if we're able to help our clients resolve, it does make sense. But even the courts, I think where it gets tricky, and just for our listeners, is the courts they can't tell you what religion, or when you're asking, one is saying that we want to raise him Catholic, we want to raise him Jewish, and the court's gonna say, I'm not ruling on that. Like, you guys have got to come to terms with it. But I think if it's related to the time sharing over particular special events, but still, I think if the court is afraid of stepping on that by, that they're making a religious decision, it can be difficult. But it's fascinating to me, because there's a lot of issues that I don't think our judiciary is really equipped or inclined to want to weigh in on, or like you said, even if do they even really have the authority to? But, who gets the children on what days is where it ends up causing the most grief, right?
yep, that's exactly correct.
And now within that, and because plus, obviously, both you and your husband have got these diverse backgrounds, which of course, clients who are going to, be attracted to that similarity and understanding. But does that present an interesting dynamic? I mean, if you're dealing with a lot of different cultural backgrounds, and as far as how that comes to play in a divorce, I would imagine that can create a lot of issues, especially like, are there some where maybe divorce isn't even really looked upon as favorable, or how that plays into, well, the religion, won't acknowledge it?
So we were just talking about this a couple minutes ago with one of my associates. So the Catholic Church, for example, doesn't allow a second marriage unless you got the first marriage annulled. And in order to do that, there's a whole bunch of steps that you have to take religiously that have nothing to do with the civil court system.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really important for people of certain faiths to get married within their congregation, their church,
Yes.
their temple, their mosques. But there's extra steps that they have to take so that it is, valued or seen and accepted within their communities. And then just to take it a step further on a tangent, in the Middle Eastern communities, because I am Middle Eastern, when a woman gets divorced, it's much harder for her to get remarried. And if you add kids to the mix, it's even more difficult. So once you're divorced, you have the big D on your forehead. And so it's harder, because then the community starts to put judgment on you. And it's harder for you to find a person that's going to marry you. I'd like to say that this generation is much more accepting and open-minded. But it's the older generation that's still, dictating and setting up marriages and doing all of these things. And it's a Southern thing too. Your parents want you to marry your best friend's kid, right? Like their best friend's kid.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same ideas. It's just throughout different cultures and times.
I think so. And I do find, and really that's fascinating, but yes, I mean, your culture and your religion, even though you may no longer be in another country, you're still probably gonna find, I guess, still find those same types of maybe prejudice or difficulty for women who are divorced. Is there still a lot of shame in that?
Yes, there is. Religiously, divorce was not accepted. It is definitely accepted in most religions. There just has to be, certain reasons for the divorce. It just can't be you don't feel the marriage marriage anymore, you know? Um, but now people are more accepting even with the shame. So if you're gonna reach outside of your community, it's a little bit easier. It depends on where you are, right? Like if you're still in a very, very, very conservative community, wherever you are in the US, it's gonna be harder. I think South Florida is a more open community. I think Northeast Florida is a more open community. It just depends. And it depends on how you were raised too. Your family could be more liberal and they could say, we really don't care what anyone says. You live your best life. So I think it depends.
Now what should, let's say like a woman who is feeling that cultural concern, you know, like what am I gonna do and should I still go through with this? Would you say there's anything in particular you would advise that they look for in a family law attorney?
Absolutely. So we are not always the right fit for every client. And I tell people this all the time. I'm not going to take any offense to you not choosing me as your divorce attorney. I think that you have to be the right fit. And in order to be the right fit, you have to understand the culture, you have to understand the language, you have to understand the religion, you have to understand the dynamics of the marriage that they're getting out of. You have to understand the special needs of the children if they have them. There's just multiple factors. And so we might not check all of those boxes, but it is essential that they do find an attorney that does, because if they do, then I feel like it's going to be much smoother for the client and the attorney in the case.
I think so. And just to have a good understanding of at least what your goals as a client, your goals, your objectives are, and do those align? And your attorney is like, okay, I'm on board with that. I can help you get there or not, because I think that's a big part of it. Now, kind of just to segue into the international divorce, because I have so many questions. We've only been involved just kind of tangentially. I don't know, I'm not even saying that correctly, but really, as like a third party in cases where it went, you know, things happen internationally, and that was mostly with the children. But, you know, if you're in a different country than, you know, where you got married and are even maybe you're a citizen, let's say you're a US citizen, but living in a different country, how does that work? Do you have people like, does that happen? Have you had those instances where it's like, well, do you get divorced where you're living or where you're a citizen?
So it all depends on your status. So how long have we had jurisdiction? So we know that in Florida, we have to have 6 months worth of jurisdiction. And the typical types of cases that we're getting, Heather, are people who are married in the Middle East or in South or Central America, and they've been living in the States, but their marriages are registered in different countries. So I'm just going to give a quick example of something we're dealing with right now.
Okay.
Without details.
Right.
Or exact details. So there's a war in Syria, obviously, that's been going on for a really long time. We just realized, and I don't know if I should be admitting this, but most of the courthouses have been destroyed. And so all the records are destroyed. So how do you go about proving that the marriage or the divorce took place in Syria? So we're doing all of the research because the people are now living in the US, right? So they want to be able to do a post-judgment action, or they want to do a divorce action, right? And so we're trying to figure out the process, and lo and behold, there is an attorney that we found who copied or took pictures of every document that he could before fleeing Syria.
Oh, wow.
So these are the type of situations when I say like international divorce, we don't practice international, but these are the international aspects that we have to figure out, because we have to go in, we can probably call him as a witness. We can call the witnesses of whatever was notarized, those types of things. And so that's the approach we're taking with this divorce or post-judgment action. Because that's as close as we're gonna get and see what the judges are gonna say. And we think it's a strong argument, but we're gonna see.
That's gonna be really interesting. Have you ever had that situation where you did not have the documents to prove it up? The marriage in another country?
I'm trying to think. I know we've had a ton of marriages and divorces out of Cuba. This is
Okay.
so it's typical because we're in South
Yeah,
Florida.
you're so close. Yeah, Miami.
Correct. And so on the probate side, what we do is there's Cuban attorneys that are appointed by the courts to go to Cuba and get these documents, or state that they've seen what they need to see in the court system, or get a certified copy or whatever it is. So on the probate side, it's super organized. We don't have the
Okay.
same system on the family side, which I think is genius.
That's brilliant. I think that I think you can create that, right? I mean, it seems like it's necessary, but
Yes,
yet so efficient.
yeah, they're called Cuban ad litems that the judge will appoint on certain cases. So what I'd like to do is, if we ever are faced with that issue, we just ask the family court to appoint a Cuban ad litem attorney to be able to go and see those documents if we can't get them elsewhere.
Because without them, because I've certainly never had this issue, I find this fascinating. But without them, if both the parties are like, yes, this is the date and this is where we were married, do you have to have the documents to prove it up?
Usually, yes. Usually they'll ask for some sort of divorce decree or something that the court wants to see to be able to prove that there was an actual divorce. But this doesn't come up when they're in agreement. This comes up when it's like one party stating, you know, I don't remember getting divorced.
Right. So if they were married in Cuba validly, you know, or whatever they say they were, and they're coming and now they're in the US and want a divorce, you're not going to have to go gather the marriage license to prove the marriage if they both say, yes, we are married.
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
Most likely
Okay.
not. No.
Okay. Well, that's good, because that I could see could present more problems, but absolutely in post judgment and trying to enforce things, that's when it is so important to understand what a court actually determined. So I can see you having a lot of difficulties if you cannot provide the documents.
No, and I want to give another juicy case we're working on, because you just reminded me when you said marriage license. We have another case where they were married in a foreign country. I can't remember which country it was. And I'm trying to remember the details. They were married in a foreign country and it was legal. And then the husband came to the States and got married to somebody in the States at the same time that they were still legally married to the wife from a different country. And there's no way of communicating, right? I mean, you're stating you're not married elsewhere when you get married here, but he wasn't telling the truth, and now he's passed.
So on the probate side,
Two issues here. And there's children from the first marriage. There's no children. No, there is children from the second marriage too. I forgot about that. There's children from both marriages, but the second marriage wouldn't take effect.
it was nullified.
Exactly.
But
So
the children would still be entitled to inherit, but the wife would be out of luck, and she would state she didn't even know.
correct. And the biggest family law issue here is there is a property that was purchased during the first marriage. And so there's going to be an argument as to who's going to receive what property. Is it going to be the first wife, the second wife? What's going to happen? It's going to be litigated for sure.
Well, that is interesting. I know people are fascinated. People are fascinated. We really don't need to watch that many TV shows or mysteries or movies, right? It's just every day there's a new mystery.
Correct.
Now, we've had a few cases. I mean, I know we're talking international divorce, but especially in Miami, like there's just so many islands. There's so much that's very nearby on a plane ride or boat. But have you had any involvement in custody cases internationally. And
So
what
we-
kind of unique challenges have you seen with those?
So the ones that come off the top of my head are, they've got married, they were married in a different country, they come to the US, and then they threaten to take the kid, or they do take the kid to a foreign country.
Mm-hmm.
So what we end up doing is we bring in an expert, a family law expert, that's able to help with the international law issues. And then we still deal with the divorce issues here, or whatever the custody issues, post-judgment, whatever it is. But what usually ends up happening is it depends on if we have a treaty with that country. It depends on if we can get a return order, all of those sorts of things. And it's much more complicated than I'm stating. But we try our best to either block them from leaving the country, or if they're already in that country, hiring the right expert to be able to get them back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've had, I know, and this is like when somebody has foresight, they believe, if their spouse is from another country, and we always have that conversation about passports, and where the children's passports are, to see what we can do to prevent it, or get a court order, preventing that, making sure the passports are returned. But then we've had an interesting issue. I would be interested to know if you've had anything of this. So they were US citizens, but living in Panama and had the baby there. They were married.
Oh, wow.
And then they had difficulty getting out. She had difficulty getting out with her child because the government was like, well, this is a citizen of this country. Like it was, and of course we had the language barrier because we don't speak Spanish. And even if we did, right, dealing with the court system and whatnot. So there were definitely lawyers down there that were hired, and it was, it's just becomes so much more complicated, and our judge, like the judges don't really know what to do either. So you've got to really help them, educate them as you're navigating the law. And then, how do you get, children back, which is difficult, even if you get a court order.
Because what you're going to end up having to do, we haven't had that issue, but what I would guess would need to happen is then you have to get that court order over to Panama. And then you're going to have to find a judge there that's going to be able to enforce that order. And do you end up opening up a case in Panama to be able to enforce that order? I mean, there's a lot of different things that are going on. But luckily we don't have those that often. We just have more of the threat of them taking the kids out of the country. That happens all the time. So we have to act quick in those situations to make sure that they don't leave with the passports and then they're out of the country. Because then once they're out of the country, exactly what you just said happened. Like it's really hard.
It is. And yeah, for our listeners, if you think it's a possibility, it's a very it's not intrusive to like gather passports and have the court say, versus even if you think maybe I'm overreacting, but he said that, I feel like he might. I think you'll agree with me, Sam, that trust me, it's better to tell your lawyer that now, and maybe you overreacted versus then. I just can't imagine that feeling of knowing your child is in another country and the difficulties with which, and cost and time to get them back is going to be pretty significant.
It is. And then if there's a timeline or some sort of time constraint that you have to work under. So if they've been there for months, you've also got to figure out how much time do I have left to make this happen?
Right. Exactly. Yes. That's a really good point, especially if they're like, well, we're just going to visit, right? A family member, summer's coming, we're just going to go for a little bit. And then all of a sudden they're not coming back. And now, maybe they're intending to establish residency jurisdiction there, which then that's, going to change the case considerably.
Correct.
Okay. I have a question for you. Have you had, I have a lot of questions. You're like, Heather, I'm on your podcast. Of course you have a question for me. Okay. So this is about property. in another country. So both parties are here in, let's say, in Miami, and let's say there's property in, another country, even like the Bahamas or Cuba, but somewhere else. And it gets awarded to one party versus the other. We've had those where, and I don't know if you've dealt with that. And, I know there can be some obstacles, changing title, getting the title done correctly, and, or even valuing that property. Have you had those kind of issues?
We have, and what we've had to do is find an attorney in that country to be able to get a valuation. We've had businesses in other countries that we've had to figure out what to do with. But since we don't have jurisdiction here, what we end up doing is getting an attorney there that will help us with the process, and then we'll work at the same time to be able to figure out how is it going to get split? What are we doing here? What are they doing there? But make sure that everything is disclosed during the process, because the majority of the time they want to hide whatever is not in the US. So that's why when we're working with the spouse, we make sure that they gather as much information about assets before they start the divorce process, so that we know the full picture and we know who we need to involve.
Yeah, I think that to me, and even we've done some, searching for records and property records, because maybe your spouse even has family or, more holdings in that country than you were even aware of. And I think that, that's just a challenge that many clients don't think about. But we usually, I think you're right, we have to hire an attorney to help kind of guide that process, so that we know it's done correctly, and that all the assets are identified, at least in their spouse's name, that, we can find, or business names.
And then I don't know if you've ever dealt with this, but what the spouse will do is they'll transfer it to a parent's name or a sibling's name. And so
shockingly, and yeah, that's so creative, right? Nobody ever thinks of that, right?
So they think get away with it by just making sure that it's not in their name anymore. But we've been able to work backwards to try to figure out, okay, what did they change over? How did they do this? When did they do this? And then bring it back into the divorce case.
Yeah, I think we've had that as well, or jointly titled, and it's like, really, is it? Or yeah, well, I owed them money, so we just transferred, and it's like, a lot of that, it seems to happen. And the thought, I'm guessing, not knowing, because it's only been, the opposing party, the husbands in our case, that have done that, is that nobody will know, that we won't bother to go look, because you do have to incur some costs to figure out what's in the records, when you're in another country.
Exactly. And they think that they can get away with it. That's the interesting part. And like in the Middle East, for example, it's through the bloodline. So, if anyone's getting divorced or whatever it is, they will put it in their brother or their dad's name, so that the wife who is not part of the family will not receive any part of it. So it's really fascinating. It's interesting how they try to get around the rules.
And that brings up an interesting point for me. So say there's the property, in the Middle Eastern, let's use that example. What recourse would the wife have? Say the divorce gets done in the US. You guys know there's property things that the court here has determined, hey, she's entitled to half this value. Because it seems as though that then becomes another challenge executing on that.
Correct. So what we usually do is, in the Middle East, for example, we have an attorney who can practice in most Middle Eastern countries. Okay. So we bring him in as an expert into our cases. We're able to pull all of the records from those countries, and we're able to have him testify, and also open whatever cases are necessary in those countries, to be able to, make sure that the wife or the husband, usually the wife, the wife is entitled to whatever her share of those properties are. But we find a local expert.
Okay. A local meaning local to their country, their city, and their country that they're in.
Yes, they're also, this person that we use, he travels, he's an attorney in all of these countries. He has offices in these countries, but he also travels to Miami probably once or twice a month. So we're able to, whatever we need, even if we need records from there, he's able to provide them to us.
That's really fascinating and how important that is, right? So for our listeners, if you know, there's property in another country, I think that's a great question for your attorney. Do you have any kind of connection with that? Because I would imagine, say you're, have, it could be any country, but yeah, you need some type of relationship. You're going to have to find somebody if the property is in London or Germany, Russia, Italy, like you're going to need to connect with international counsel, most likely, right? To really get the right details.
You definitely do. You need an attorney who has those connections and is going to be able to understand, exactly what you're saying, because it's not as simple as just Googling somebody. You really need like a personal connection so that they're not just ignoring you if you reach out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is, that's really important. And it's so, it just gets so complicated. And we've only dealt, like I said, just a very few, and we were really able to, find that relationship with another attorney. But I know many, our world is so vast. People travel. It's, there are a lot of international relationships, divorces, and people have holdings in other countries. And, and getting that, your share of that is really important. Now, how often have you been or presented with issues with when you're dealing in international issues? And let's say, the divorce is done, but the wife is really afraid. He says, he's entitled to take the children, to visit his family, let's say, in Europe, to the Middle East. But she's like, I'm afraid he won't come back. And what if he doesn't? What do I do?
We have luckily not had to deal with many of these issues. And if we have, we've been able to get, counsel on the husband's side. We get them involved immediately and tell them, they've been gone for 2 days after the order stated. And the attorney has been able to tell their client, listen, you got to communicate, you got to bring the kids back. So we've been okay with these types of cases. However, I've seen other people that have had to involve local counsel. So they've had to take their order from the US, show that order to whatever country the kids are in, and then be able to get the embassy or whoever's in charge to be able to get control of the kids and the parent and bring the kids back. So it's not an easy process. And hopefully if you're agreeing to this, in court, you trust your ex-spouse to be able to vacation with your child and bring them back. But if you don't, I wouldn't recommend putting any language regarding that in your final judgment, in your parenting plan, in whatever it is. I wouldn't recommend it.
Yes. Do you find that, because I think, and I agree with you, right? If you have those worries, hey, don't put that in there. But if there is no language in the parenting plan and your ex goes to court to say, hey, maybe I don't have the passports. I want the passports. I'm entitled to time. There's no reason I can't take them to another country. I feel like that would probably be granted.
It would. And it almost is. And what I've seen the majority of the time is that it will say, give X amount of notice if you're planning to take the kids out of the country on an international trip. And, 9 times out of 10, it works out with no issues. It's that 10% of the time that you're going to have to get involved. I've seen parents fly over and try to get control of the kids. There's many different things that we've seen, but I think that your best bet is contacting your attorney here, seeing if that attorney has any way of getting word to an attorney in that country, getting opposing counsel involved, and then bringing the kids.
Yeah, I know. So, it can be so difficult and stressful. I know. And what about, I haven't had any, time sharing agreements like across the international borders. Have you had experience with any of that? and how the courts, handle those kind of things?
No, we, when you mean time sharing across borders, you mean parents living in two different countries?
Yes. Yes.
We have not had to deal with that. So usually the parents are both in the United States.
Okay.
I mean, most of the time they'll go on international trips, but no, one of the parents is not international. We've never had to deal with that.
That is, because I mean, and I guess that would be just a standard if they lived in a different part of this country. It's just, again, enforcement if the children aren't returned. Or if you don't deliver them, there's just more to deal with there. Now you were talking about, as we started the show, or, proving if the parties agree, right, and they were married, it's not like you have to prove that up. But I think you mentioned, before we were reporting to our producer, scenarios where they thought they were married in another country, but then they weren't to begin with. Or tell us about that, because that would be a shocker.
So what usually ends up happening is that the person was married prior to marrying the second person, and they didn't get divorced to the first person. So when they're marrying the second spouse for 20 plus years think that they're married to this person, but in actuality, they're married to the first spouse, and the first spouse is, going to be entitled to everything, and they never got divorced. So it's a sticky topic, because I think what ends up happening is that the husband just didn't want to have to deal with the divorce from the first spouse, from the first wife, and so then they go and get married to a second person, but that marriage is not going to be valid.
Right. And I guess come the divorce, they're like, oh, well, we weren't really even married, because now it's to their advantage to admit that, even though obviously they fraudulently induced them to that, but still the laws, like at least the family laws, aren't really going to be able to provide the kind of support and protection, I would imagine.
No, and what I think that the husbands are thinking is, if it was done in another country, there's no way of anybody finding out. So even if they pass away or anything happens, who's going to come forward and state that they were married? Because the first wife has no contact with the husband anymore. So how is she supposed to find out he passed away, or he's in the hospital, or whatever it is? So in their minds, they're like, I'm going to get out of this and nobody's going to know anything.
But not always happen. Doesn't always happen like that, does it? Okay, that's crazy though. So like for women, going to marry somebody who's international, I mean, gosh, there's really nothing legally they can do. I guess they could do some kind of background search. That would pick that up, I suppose.
Yes, background search. They would be able to, I mean, they could do an international search. They could do something that would be able to pull, whether they're married in that country. But who really does that?
I know, nobody. You're in love. You want to get married. No, they're not going to do that. You and I know they're not going to do that.
No, I've never heard of anyone doing that.
No, only on TV, right? On the spy shows, that they do that.
Exactly.
But it really is interesting, and I think you're right. They're just the guy, if it's the guy coming over here, you're thinking, no one's gonna know. She's not gonna know. I've left that life behind me. I'm starting over. But towards the end, that
the complications come in when they have kids from the first marriage, because it's like, dude, like, how did you not think that your kid is not gonna rat you out? Your kid knows that you were married to their mom, right? Or their dad. And they're going to be the ones to be able to give that information. So it's really interesting. And it usually plays out with a family and probate issue, to be honest. They're like always intertwined.
Well, there has to be something that alerts, like brings it to the attention of anyone, right?
Correct. Or what we've seen too is there's a minor child or adult child, but usually a minor child that's from the mistress or the second or third marriage, and then first marriage didn't know about it, and it comes out later on.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
A lot of secrets, right? A lot of secrets being kept, but the children, you know, are the ones who are the spoilers, I guess. All right, so oh, okay, this is an interesting topic, a little bit off, but because the show is called Women Winning Divorce, we talk about women and also successful women, because those are who our guests usually are. I would consider that to be you as well. And if you don't mind, I'd love for you to share with our listeners about the growth of your firm while you were on maternity leave with your first child.
Sure. So, we had our first child. He is now 14 months old, last February of 2023. And so I was planning on taking 2 whopping weeks off for maternity leave because I serve as the visionary / CEO of the firm. And so I just couldn't imagine myself taking off any time, to be honest. But you know, life has different plans. And I had to go into an emergency C-section. And as a result of that, my recovery time was more than 2 weeks. So it ended up being about 6 months, not because I needed it, but everything was running itself. We have policies and procedures in place. We have different management positions. So luckily, we were able to set everything up before I went out on maternity leave. And so I was able to take 6 months off without having to really worry about anything. And it was our best year. We grew the most that we've ever grown. So
Wow.
It was awesome.
That is awesome. And that's so important. So congratulations on,
Yeah.
you know, being able to take that time for yourself, your child, your family, and that your business, you know, could continue to grow, because that's great. And it's so important. I think, you know, too often women feel like, well, we have to do everything or we can't take time off. And so that's really wonderful to hear. Now I have another question, because it's Women Winning Divorce. So again, on theme about, you know, your biggest win or favorite part of family law. And, you know, a lot of people say there's no winning in a divorce, but I do disagree, because I think if you achieve your objectives, that's a win. And it's not necessarily making someone else lose. It's, you know, you gain your freedom or you gain your independence and, you know, gain access to financials, right? Like there's a lot of ways you can win. So couched in those terms, but what would you consider as your biggest win or favorite part of family law?
I was going to mention cases, but actually my biggest win is developing this firm. So I did not ever want to have a law firm. I always wanted to become partner and, you know, take the partnership track and, you know, be able to run ideas off of people. And then just decided that this was probably the best plan. And I should rewind and say, I grew up with very little. So I'm the oldest of 3 girls. My parents are immigrants to this country. They came in the late 80s. They started having us. And so I just never saw myself as a business owner or an entrepreneur. And so I think going from being a Section 8 housing and food stamp baby to then establishing a multi-million-dollar business is probably my biggest win.
Well, absolutely. I would completely agree. So I guess as we're running out of time, what's next for you?
What is next? So our goal is to help as many families as possible throughout the state of Florida with any of their family or probate needs, and just establish a solid reputation. So we have a very strong, thank God, reputation in South Florida. And so I just want to continue that. I think it's important. It's important being one of the only Palestinian Arab American women who own a law firm here in Florida. And so I just think that I would love for that legacy to keep going and to just bring, you know, diversity, inclusion, and, you know, show women that you can come from nothing and you can make a business that you love with people who love coming to work. And I know that sounds cheesy, but I've established my firm in a way that I envisioned it, and I'm super proud of that.
Well, that's awesome. I really do. I don't think that's cheesy at all, Sam. I really think it's inspiring. And I think when we really are able to, particularly women, we can do so much. And as women own businesses, I don't know, I feel very fortunate. I love all my staff. I love that I'm able to provide, not only employment, but a place where they really want to come and work. And we can help so many people through that, which is really what we're all here to do, I think. So, but lastly, Sam, where can our listeners find you? More information about you?
Absolutely. So they can call our office at 305-677-5119. They can visit us on our website, www.flpfl.com, or they can follow us on social media at Lawyer Lady Boss.
Oh, I love it. Lawyer Lady Boss. That is a great title. Well, we will put all of those links below in our show notes.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for being on our show today. It was so great to get to know you better and learn more about you and your firm. And we really have enjoyed that. And listeners, if you or someone you know is going through a divorce or is thinking about a divorce, and really in Northeast Florida or in South Florida, because we have Sam here and the links to her firm will be there, but please reach out to us, either firm, for some guidance and help. You can find us at FloridaWomen'sLawGroup.com. Also, we welcome you to join our Facebook group, Women Winning Divorce, to have conversations for other women who are maybe a little further along in the process than you are, or maybe a little bit sooner, but a great community for women to join together. You'll find all of those links in the episode description below, and we thank you all for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Women Winning Divorce. My goal is to elevate your life and the way you are thinking so that you are best equipped to win at life. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe so you automatically get my new shows every week. And I would love to hear from you personally. Come join the conversation on social and join our Facebook group, Women Winning Divorce. We welcome your comments and suggestions. We want to bring you content that helps move your life forward. Women Winning Divorce is the place for an elevated conversation on how women can thrive during times of adversity in order to live their best life.